Here in the UK, 50-50 sandwich bread is a common sight on supermarket shelves. And I would guess it's quite popular with people who don't know how to make bread yet. As the name suggests, it is made up of a mix of flours, half white, half whole wheat. And that is supposed to give you the best of both worlds. Softness from the white flour, plus flavour and nutrition from the whole wheat. Calling factory mass-produced bread nutritious is quite a stretch though. Supermarket sandwich bread is boring, flimsy, flavourless, and empty when it comes to nutritional value. In my quest to introducing as many people as possible to home baking, I have tried to simplify the baking process as much as possible while still getting great results. This recipe is aimed at those who are used to eating store-bought sandwich bread but would like to transition to home baking. It uses the bare minimum ingredients for maximum flavor, softness and keeping quality. And the whole process is very beginner friendly. The seasoned bakers out there may enjoy this recipe also. It's a good and honest 50-50 sandwich bread. So let's get right to it, let me show you how it's done. Starting with the ingredients. We'll need white bread flour and whole wheat bread flour. We'll need some water, milk, yeast, salt, sugar and some oil. It doesn't take a lot to make a nice soft bread that will stay fresh for a long time. When it comes to the equipment, we don't need much either. A bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe and a baking tin. I'm going to use my all-time favorite USA pan Pullman tin. If you're going to use a regular 2-pound loaf tin, reduce the amount of ingredients by a quarter, otherwise the dough will be too big. If you are interested in the tin that I'm using, you can find it in my Amazon shop link down below. Okay, let's move on to making our dough. And it all starts with a scald. We'll mix part of the whole wheat flour, the sugar, the salt, the oil, and boiling water. This process cooks the starch in the flour. It will weaken the dough, making our loaf lighter, and the gelatinized starch will be able to hold on to moisture for longer, preventing our loaf from drying out too soon. You can find a full detailed video about scalding in the Principles of Baking playlist. Once your scald is fully mixed, cover it up and leave it to cool down. It is the scalding method, along with the sugar, milk, and oil that will give our bread that super soft texture. I was a little bit short on time here, so I didn't leave my scald to cool down completely. Instead, I used my milk from the fridge to cool it down quicker, and you can do the same. You could even make the scald with less water to begin with, and then top it up with cold milk and cold water. But we don't want this dough to be too cool however, because this is a relatively quick recipe, meaning that we are not going to ferment this dough for a long time. But that is of course up to you. You can adjust this recipe. You could even cold ferment it, but it won't turn out as soft. Or you could make the scald a day ahead of time. Prepare it ahead, so that on the day of baking you don't have to spend too much time. Okay, so to continue making the dough, add the yeast and the whole wheat flour to the scald and mix it well. Finally, add the white bread flour, grab your dough scraper and mix it to a dough. It is good to mix it in stages, because we are not kneading this dough. This way we ensure that all the ingredients are distributed evenly. Once the dough is fully mixed, give it a quick temperature check. It is relatively warm, but as I mentioned, this is a quick fermented bread. So let's cover it up and leave it to ferment for 30 minutes. Bulk fermentation at this temperature will take 1 hour. It will be punctuated by one fold halfway through. To perform the fold, dust the dough with flour, tip it out on the table with the smooth side down, flatten it out, then fold the edge over the middle, go around the circle, reach point where you started. Flip it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table, that's your fold done. This dough is a little bit sticky, so don't be shy, dust it with some flour. After folding, place the dough back into the bowl, cover it up, and leave it to ferment for another 30 minutes. Right after bulk fermentation we can do the final shaping. Once again dust the dough with flour, release it from the bowl, drop it out on the table with the smooth side down. Then dust it a little bit more to avoid any stickage and flatten it out. Make it about as long as your loaf tin. And to shape it, simply roll it up. Try to make it as straight and even as you can. If it starts becoming a bit narrow towards the bottom, pull it out sideways and keep rolling. After rolling it up, place it in your baking tin with the seam side down. I'm not greasing my tin or lining it with anything, because this dough will definitely not stick. But if your tin is a bit sticky, you might want to do that. Okay, let's cover up the loaf and leave it for the final proof, which will also be pretty quick at around 45 to 60 minutes. During the final proof, preheat the oven to 180 degrees Celsius, 355 Fahrenheit, fan on. And that'll be 200 Celsius or 390 Fahrenheit, fan off. Let the dough rise until the very top of the tin. If you are using a regular 2-pound loaf tin, you might want to spray the dough with some water. It'll stop the top crust from drying out too quickly in the oven. Alternatively, if you have a deep tin without a lid, you could cover it with some foil. I love my USA pan Pullman tin. It is one of the best pieces of baking equipment that I own. Well, let's get this puppy in the oven. The initial bake will take around 40 minutes. After 40 minutes of baking, remove the tin from the oven, remove the loaf from the tin. If it needs some persuasion, you can use your dough scraper to help release it from the tin, but it shouldn't stick too much. Carefully tip it out, don't pinch it with your fingertips, it is still a little bit delicate at this point. Whenever I'm making bread like this, I always like to place it back into the oven to finish off the crust. So let's get it back in there for another 5 minutes of baking. And there you go, that's our little imitation supermarket bread, which is far better than supermarket bread. Once it's almost cooled down, I like to wrap it up in cling film to preserve the softness of the crust. Okay, now that we're done, we can compare the breads side by side. The homemade bread has a much richer color, and it has kept its shape a lot better than the store-bought bread. Let's take out a slice of each and compare the texture. One thing that I really don't like about store-bought sandwich bread is that it's so flimsy. Yes, it's soft, but that softness renders it absolutely useless. It's only good for toasting, and even then it's not very good, because then it just turns into a crouton. But what do I mean by useless? See, homemade bread, you can easily spread butter onto it. When you try to spread anything on store-bought bread, it just tears a hole in it. It is super thin, it doesn't have any structure to it. The look and texture are just the beginning of our problems, because when you take a bite, this thing does not taste of anything. It is worthless and empty. If more people knew how easy it is to make bread, they would never touch this stuff. So if you know someone who eats bread like this, send them over to my channel. Maybe they'll fall in love with baking like you and I. Oh, and before I go, here's the bread that I made. 4 days later, still nice and soft. Not that you should keep it for that long, but you can.